All right, welcome everyone. Since we are at the hour, we're going to go ahead and get started with our programming as people continue to roll in. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar on municipal climate risk disclosure, co-hosted by ICLEI USA and Ceres. We're excited to bring together experts and practitioners to explore how municipalities can better assess and disclose climate-related financial risks. My name is Alyssa Wilbur. I'm a senior program officer with ICLEI USA. And I'm going to start off just by covering a few housekeeping items for today's webinar. You will see that we do have the chat function disabled today, but we would like you to ask any and all questions that you have that come up throughout the session by using the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom on your taskbar. And we will have time towards the end of the session to address audience questions that come in. This session is recorded, and we will send out a recording along with materials that are mentioned throughout the session in a follow-up email to all registrants. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Stephen Rothstein, who's going to go over a quick disclosure for today's session.
Thank you very much for this and for the partnership. Welcome, everybody. So again, we just want to make sure everyone has a chance to look at this, to make sure that there's no, from a competitive perspective, we're not looking at any collective decision-making. So let me give just a few seconds for you to read this. And next slide, please. We also just want to say this is a reference guide. We're not registered advisors, or we're not recommending any particular elements, just as general, the recommendations are general in nature, not tied to any particular offering. Again, let me give a few seconds so you can read this. Great. Thank you. And again, with appreciation for the partnership, I'll turn it back to Alyssa.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. So just a quick look at our agenda and learning objectives today. We'll begin with an overview of climate-related risks and their impacts on municipal governments. We'll explore current disclosure practices and where gaps remain. And then following that, we will head into a panel discussion and close out with, again, the Q&A session to hear from you all. As Stephen mentioned, we're really appreciative for this partner. We're thrilled to be partnering with Ceres on this webinar, and we look forward to collaborating on more resources for this broader audience in the future. For those who are new to ICLEI, we are a U.S. office of a global network of over 2,500 local and regional governments focused on sustainable development. We've been supporting U.S. cities, towns, counties, regions, and tribal nations since 1995. We provide almost 400 communities with technical assistance and capacity building support to advance equitable, data-informed climate action. And ICLEI USA support includes access to ClearPath 2.0, which is our flagship platform for greenhouse gas management and climate action planning. A critical part of our work is helping local governments integrate climate into finance and budgeting decisions, from aligning climate plans with grant applications to offering risk assessment resources. Our goal is to make climate considerations a routine part of fiscal decision-making. We help cities integrate climate goals into annual and climate budgets, encourage the use of tools such as priority-based budgeting and climate budget tagging, and we support communities in how to communicate the cost of inaction can be severe, affecting everything from disaster recovery costs to credit ratings, which brings us to why we are here today. So with that, I'm thrilled to hand the mic back over to Stephen Rothstein, who's the Managing Director of the Ceres Accelerator for Sustainable Capital Markets. Over to you.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. We have a very distinguished panel in addition to co-hosting with ICLEI, which we're thrilled to do. It's really a pleasure to introduce our team. Brian McCartan is Senior Fellow at Ceres, and he has over 30 years of experience in public finance, international, federal, and regional level. Rob Fernandez, who's a Director of Sustainable Research at Breckinridge Capital Advisors. He leads their ongoing sustainability investing and engagement efforts and performs sustainable research analysis. Julia Chase, the Chief Resilience Officer of the City of San Diego. She oversees the implementation of the city's Adaptation and Resilience Program. And last but definitely not least, Katie Walsh, the Head of Climate Finance for Cities for CDP. and Katie leads the city, states, and public authorities programs at CDP North America. So it's a really distinguished panel, and I know you're going to learn a lot from them. Next slide, please. So Ceres, some of you we worked with extensively, some not as much. We're a nonprofit. We've been around for over 35 years. We work with large investors, large companies for a more just and sustainable world. We fundamentally believe that companies, investors, municipalities, regulators that think about sustainability issues will, in the long run, they're aligned with fiduciary duty and financial returns. Next slide, please. As I say, we work with some of the largest companies, some of the largest investors. Our investors collectively, it's about $40 trillion of assets under management, including obviously purchasing and municipal debt, but every other sector across the economy, and policy network working with policymakers at the state, federal, and international level. Next slide, please. I don't have to tell anyone on this call, by definition of you're spending time on this, to understand that climate change is an enormous challenge, and to say municipalities, and when I say municipalities, I also mean county governments, regional school districts, water districts, state governments, and others, but municipality for shorthand, are facing enormous challenges. To state the obvious, they can't move. When there's a fire in LA, they can't move to Milwaukee or something. And these are long-term bonds, 20 years, that in the 80s, we had $1 billion storm every 3 to 4 months. Last year, we had it every 12, 13 days. So the numbers are growing, the severity are growing, and enormous issues. Next slide, please. And they're having a long-term impact. It's affecting, we've seen the most extreme case in whether it be the LA fire recently, but in whether it be Kentucky or across the country. Unfortunately, it's affected every single state. It's affected property values. There are counties now that the property values are actually going down because of climate and risk, the relationship with banks and insurance. We're talking about the physical risk, fires, floods, tornadoes, but then that implication on if you can't get insurance because of climate, the impact on the mortgage market, and that affects obviously town budgets, municipal budgets, or what revenue they get in, or what they need to spend money on, and obviously greater uncertainty with the federal government and what FEMA will or will not be doing to back up these things. And while we're talking about the physical property, it's also the extreme heat and the impact on people and their individuals and their livelihoods. Next slide, please. And so we think fundamentally, Ceres thinks fundamentally that you can't manage a problem if you can't measure it. This is a $4 trillion marketplace, municipal bond market. Last year alone, or the year before, excuse me, it was $500 billion. It was issued. There's 50,000 issuers, so lots of small issuers, and that the risks are growing, and that there should be some standardization, as my colleague Brian's going to talk about in the next minute. But LA, just a second on that, municipal market is seen as very safe and secure, but as we've just seen in LA, because of the tragic fire there, that's led to some of the outstanding bonds for the city and county being downgraded. Next slide, please. And this is in the context of a growing trend around the world. There is growing desire for more disclosure. That there are now 35 countries. This is in addition to the United States. 35 countries that have in some form final approval or they've already approved corporate climate disclosure. So this would be a sister-related area of municipal climate disclosure. Those 35 countries represent 60% of the world's GDP. That's in addition to California, which, as we all know, if it were its own country, would be the fourth largest economy in the world, and others. So there's a growing trend of climate is a risk, and that investors and others want good information. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to turn this over to my colleague, Brian. Brian, we did a report, really, you took the lead, which we're deeply appreciative of your great work, on recommended on disclosure work. Can you give an overview of the current risk disclosure and some of the recommendations? Brian.
Sure, Stephen. Thanks very much. I'd be pleased to. Next slide, please. Greetings to everybody on the call. Really great to see such a large group interested in this topic, which both Ceres and ICLEI see is really something that's going to become more and more relevant for both issuers and investors as the time goes forward here. And as a result, Ceres has issued this recent report, Leading with Transparency, that I hope folks on the call will take a deeper look at as it goes into much more detail on some recommendations and best practices related to disclosure. And just building off Stephen's comments, as Ceres talked with investors and rating agencies in preparing this report, what became clear to us is that both rating agencies and investors are increasingly aware of the climate risks that are faced by public entities, and they are gaining more access to tools to understand the risks that municipalities, governments face. And so in coming to capital markets, issuers already know your risks. The issuers, the risk that wildfire, severe weather risks that are faced by the issuer. What they don't know is how are issuers prepared to deal with that risk. So Ceres and ICLEI really see disclosure, strong disclosure, as a way for the issuer to tell their story to the market, to explain how they're organized, what's happened in the past, how they're prepared. And so in looking at the current disclosure framework, there's basically two required areas for disclosure that each and every public entity has to do, and one optional disclosure. So I want to quickly run through what those areas are and what the current practices are. So next slide, please. So the first area of required disclosure relates to the annual audited financial statements. Some of you may issue just a audited statement, others may have a CAFR. And in that, the entity has to disclose its balance sheet and income statement. And if there has been a climate-related loss or impact, material impact that has already occurred, GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, requires that those material impacts be recorded in the financial statements. And there are a number of GASB requirements that dictate how those are needed to show up in the financial statements. These are almost always covered by the Office of the Controller or the accounting lead for the public entity. So that's within the numbers themselves. At the front of the financial statements, there is something called the management discussion analysis. And again, GASB requires that management, the public entity, disclose any, quote, current conditions that have a significant effect on financial position. So if a city is facing acute risk related to wildfire, for example, it would be best practice for the city in its management discussion analysis to have a short discussion of those risks. So you see a Sonoma County Water Agency example here, but our report includes a couple other examples of cities that are starting to include in their MD&A a discussion of material climate risks. So that's place one, is the audited financial statements. Next slide, please. The second place that it's required is in what's called the bond offering document or official statement. So when any city, county, state goes to market, it has to produce a document to tell bondholders about what they're potentially buying. And it has to disclose the repayment for the bonds, what kind of bonds they are, and material financial risks. So the current regulatory framework that's propagated by the federal government is by design it's called a self-regulatory approach, which is the issuers themselves get to decide what's material and disclose that. They have to disclose it, otherwise they're subject to fraud provisions of SEC regulations. But it means that it's up to every jurisdiction working with its bond counsel and its financial advisors decide how to disclose material risks. And as a result, unsurprisingly, the practices that Ceres discovered varies very widely. So there are some issuers that have strong disclosure related to climate risks, and others with risk, but almost no disclosure. And even those that are disclosing, again, have very inconsistent practices on how the material is presented. Generally, even the best practices, what you'll see in the official statement, is 3 to 4 paragraphs that describe what the risks are to the entity, what's happened in the past, and maybe some key initiatives that the issuer is undertaking to meet those risks. So again, our report, if you're interested, you can drill in and see some of the examples. The links are embedded in this PowerPoint deck that you can get after the presentation, or in the report that you can find on the Ceres website shows other examples. So again, this is an area where we're starting to see better disclosure, but a long way to go. Next slide, please. Then the third area that is not required, and usually you see with larger issues, not smaller school districts, but larger issuers, is climate action reporting. This can take a couple of forms. It can be a climate action plan. It can be a climate resilience report. It can be other risk reports that either a public utility puts out or a city puts out. You're going to see an example of this today. Excellent report from San Diego. Julie will run you through that report. Again, you tend to see this in larger issuers, but what this is really good is it allows you to tell a much longer story to investors about what actions have been taken, and you can embed that document link either in the official statement or in your investor website page that is usually maintained by the finance department. And Ceres recommends that larger issuers with over $1 billion of debt try to develop this kind of report, because it's really the best place to go into detail about the climate risk the city is facing and what they're doing about it. A general format that's used for this is called the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Again, this report has a couple of examples of that, where you outline the risks that the issuer is facing, the governance, how you're organized, the strategy that the entity is taking, and then some key metrics. We're really pleased to have Katie with us today, because CDP has the strongest sort of centralized repository for this sort of risk disclosure. And so you'll be able to hear from her about how that tool can be utilized. So I hope that's a useful summary for the kind of key three areas: financial statements, audited financial statements, official statements, and climate action reporting, where you can issue or find climate information, climate risk information by municipalities. So with that, happy to turn it over to Stephen and the panel for dive in on some of these topics.
Great. Next slide, please. These are just resources. Again, all of these are linked in the report, that you'll get the link to the report, and the slides that they will go live. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Brian, for not just your comments today, but for your weeks and months of work leading up to this. It really, your experience here really made an enormous impact. Thank you so much. Turning over to Rob. Rob, we've worked with you and your firm for a while. Tell us how investors currently think about climate risk in terms of municipal securities. What tools do you use? What information are you looking for? And what do you think would be helpful? Rob, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be here. Next slide, please. So I have two slides that I'll quickly review. The first one is just a high-level overview of Breckinridge, and I'm here to provide the investor perspective on the importance of municipal climate disclosure. So just at a high level, Breckinridge manages approximately $52 billion in assets. We're based in Boston, have an office in San Diego. Of the bulk of the assets that we do manage, about $38.5 billion, that consists of municipal bonds. So we're a big player in the municipal bond market. And we invest in a variety of municipal sectors, including bonds issued by cities, school districts, and nonprofit hospital systems. We manage portfolios in separate accounts for institutional as well as for individuals and families. As part of our portfolio management process, our research analysts perform bottom-up fundamental investment analysis, and this is on all the municipal securities we buy for clients. And consideration of sustainability factors is an important element of this research. Breckinridge believes municipalities that are conscious of and effective in managing material sustainability issues are likely to carry less risk, less credit, or investment risk over the long term. Examples of sustainability issues that we're paying attention to include the sourcing of water by a municipal water system located in an arid region, a drought-prone region, or the zoning and construction of affordable housing by a town or city to support population growth in that community. Next slide, please. So specific to Stephen's questions, this slide will address those. I'll start with the left-hand slide and portion of the slide, and that box focus on physical climate risks. So a key research area for us in terms of our sustainability research is understanding a municipality's exposure to various climate perils and the value of property in the area at risk of damage. We pay close attention to a municipality's plan to address these risks. So we consider both acute and chronic climate risks in our research. And we do this for three key reasons, as kind of laid out on the left-hand portion of that slide. So number one, as Stephen mentioned earlier, these risks are pertinent for municipalities because they cannot move. They can't relocate, so they have to manage them. Secondly, we view climate risk as a threat multiplier. Climate events can magnify existing credit weaknesses of a municipal bond issuer. So for example, pensions are an elevated and growing cost for a number of cities in the US. Layering on climate change challenges and the potentially large associated costs of adaptation or mitigation could create a competing fiscal demand that might complicate a city's efforts to control pension costs. And then third, Breckinridge continues to find little evidence for a physical climate risk pricing penalty in the US municipal bond market. We shared this view on the pricing disconnect in a client article available on our website. The title is Heating Up, the Muni Market Inches Closer to Pricing Climate Risk. Reasons for the lack of climate risk pricing and bond valuations include the fact that municipalities that exhibit material physical risk are unlikely to experience credit weakening over the near term. That's what it seems like right now. But however, we do anticipate the muni market is getting closer to pricing physical climate risk over time. As Stephen said earlier, it's going to be kind of the price of admission to the market. It's kind of related to that. There are 5 trends that support our thesis about bond pricing getting closer to incorporating climate risks. I'll just mention 2 of them. One is a changing insurance environment where less access to private insurance and less generous government subsidies for recovery could impact home values and tax bases. And number 2, it's related to the great work of Ceres and ICLEI and CDP and the dedication of municipal officials that climate disclosure is improving. Just as a proxy, as an example, in 2024, nearly 30% of the muni bond market offering statements included the term climate change. This figure is up from below 5% 10 years ago. So it's certainly going in the right direction, but certainly we have a lot more, there's a lot more to do. And then just a couple of final points on the right-hand portion of the slide. Breckinridge's assessment of sustainability as well as climate risks incorporates both quantitative analysis and qualitative research. The quantitative analysis consists of sustainability frameworks that we developed that incorporate publicly available data. We use this data to assess issues that could impact a municipality's viability and investment quality over time. They include the level of broadband access and availability of parks and recreational facilities, just as examples. For climate data, we source that from third parties. Our need to purchase climate data speaks to the challenges facing investors, and as being discussed on this webinar today. The lack of standardized climate disclosure drives our need to work with a data vendor. However, many investors do not have the resources to do that. The data we purchase helps us evaluate an issuer's exposure to hurricanes, flood, drought, and heat. Finally, in addition to determining a municipality's exposure to climate risk, our analysts evaluate the degree to which the risk is being managed by the municipality. Our analysts will consider the breadth and depth of the climate adaptation planning that's underway, or maybe not underway yet. We'll also look at public disclosures such as the city's climate action plan and reporting made to CDP. We also look at if capital expenditures and any related debt issuance is focused on needed climate resiliency improvements. Overall, we look favorably from an investment perspective on municipalities that disclose their climate risks and clearly lay out their plans for mitigating them. So we'd like to see that plan there. Thank you. And now I'll turn it to Julia Chase, who will go next.
Yeah, Julia, first, Rob, thank you so much. And your comments about the way you think about it, obviously, as you say, you guys are a significant player in there, and the thoughtful comments of what you're doing is a real leadership. Julia, so speaking of leadership, you're doing a great job in San Diego. You've issued this climate resiliency report, the city's comprehensive climate adaptation resilience plan. What was the motivating factor to issue this? How did you work across the city? Complicated set of issues, and what were the challenges and lessons learned? Julia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I'm Julia Chase. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer with the City of San Diego. So I oversee implementation of Climate Resilient SD, which is the city's first climate adaptation and resilience plan. And today, I'll be sharing a little bit about that planning process and what we learned along the way. Our adaptation planning process goes back to 2018. When we first completed a series of vulnerability assessments to understand what was at risk to various climate change-driven hazards. This work was driven both by city policy and strategic goals. So our 2015 Climate Action Plan identified the need for a standalone adaptation plan, as well as legislative requirements in the state of California under AB 691 and SB 379. So the first step in this process was to understand what hazards did we need to be concerned with, and for those hazards, where across our city was exposed. For San Diego, and for this effort, our primary hazards are precipitation-driven flooding, sea level rise, extreme heat, and wildfire. Drought is also a primary hazard for us, but it has a separate work stream that is addressing our water supply. So we wanted to really understand across all of our asset classes and resources what is vulnerable. And so we did this through determining exposure of the climate hazards, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity of each of those assets. A really critical component of this process was to make sure that we were working with both internal and external stakeholders throughout development of the vulnerability assessment. So we had an internal working group that had about 18 different city departments at that time who were a part of developing the vulnerability assessment and really validating and understanding those vulnerability rankings. We also had an external working group that helped to ensure consistency with approach and connection to regional efforts, and also better understand potential consequences. So along with the vulnerability scores, we also looked at the potential consequence of this exposure. So what does that mean if a wastewater treatment plant is exposed, or if we have flooding in a roadway? And our external working group helped us to understand some of those regional connections even better. The vulnerability assessment really provides us a foundational understanding of what are the risks that we face and what are the future conditions for the city of San Diego likely to be, as well as a prioritized list of assets by vulnerability, ranking, and hazard, which is the chart on the left there. It's a snapshot of what is a very long and technical report that allows us to look across our asset types and say what has a medium or high vulnerability to the various hazards that we looked at. This is important for a couple of key reasons. One is that the city is quite a large jurisdiction. We manage extensive assets for water resources alone. If you were to look at those, we have thousands of miles of pipelines, over 100 pump stations, multiple water and wastewater treatment plants. And so we really wanted to be able to focus our efforts, our resources, where there's the greatest need. Alongside that, this vulnerability assessment helps to inform our adaptation plan so that we can identify where do we need plans, policies, projects to mitigate that risk and build resilience. For the city, we found that not only is some of our critical infrastructure at risk and highly vulnerable, but also some of those may be a little bit less tangible assets. So things like our historic and tribal cultural resources, our habitat and open space that do have real cultural significance, connection to place, or impacts to livelihoods and ecosystems. Next slide. So this brings us to development of climate resilient SD. As mentioned, the vulnerability assessment helped to inform strategies within the plan. So there's tailored strategies that address the vulnerabilities to our assets. But we also broadened our scope a bit here to think about social and community resilience as well. For coordination, we maintained the same internal and external working groups throughout plan development. This not only ensured that our strategies are aligned with our operations, that we're able to implement them when the plan is adopted, but also that we are supporting capacity building across the city throughout this entire planning process. The plan includes 88 strategies that focus on maintaining critical city services, building sustainable and equitable communities, protecting our natural environment, building community awareness and readiness, and protecting our sensitive resources. So that looks like, how do we integrate climate change projections into our long-range plans, our community plans? How do we integrate them into our infrastructure design guidelines? But also, how do we ensure that community members have the information and resources they need to make informed choices? Now that we are in the implementation phase, the plan is really providing both that overarching policy guidance as well as a framework for how do we implement these strategies and how do we truly move forward to a more resilient future. To support implementation, a common theme here is that continued coordination. So we have leads across city departments, we have internal working groups with our climate resilience liaisons, and we also have that overarching governance oversight that helps to coordinate resilience across the city. We report annually on progress that's made for all the strategies within the plan, and also look to make sure that this plan does not get too out of date, that we're regularly updating the plan to reflect the best available science as well as current community needs and priorities. So just a couple of takeaways from the planning effort: engage early, engage often. Our stakeholders, whether they're internal or external, are all really critical to both really validating what the vulnerability assessment is finding, and especially when you get into, what is the sensitivity of a specific asset, and does it have adaptive capacity to be adjusted in response to hazard exposure? But also, our community members are unfortunately already experiencing the impacts. We're seeing floods, we're seeing wildfires, we're seeing extreme heat events, and so understanding how those impacts are being felt so that we can have strategies that are building more resilient communities and really mitigating some of that risk. The other main takeaway I would say that I think has been really supportive in moving the plan forward is getting all levels of buy-in from staff up to leadership. So staff are the ones that are going to be implementing the plan on a day-to-day basis. Make sure you're working with them closely, but leadership is ultimately who is going to adopt the plan and move the plan forward and continue to support those efforts. And so, we've been really lucky within San Diego and within California that there's a lot of support for the climate work, but sometimes there needs to be a little bit of foundation building, maybe if climate isn't something that's as focused on wherever you are working. And so that education around, what are the real risks that we're facing? What does the science tell us that we should be planning for, and providing that foundational understanding to inform the planning efforts going forward. So I'll pause there.
Great, thank you so much. That's very comprehensive. I think you said that you work with 18 departments, if I heard that correctly. How do you work with either legal or financial to integrate some of that amazing work into some of these financial documents or offering statements, or is that something that you hope to do in the near future?
Yeah, great question. So our Department of Finance really leads on all things financial for the city of San Diego. They have been a part of those working groups from day one, because, while they're not managing a direct asset, like say maybe our water department is, there are, as Rob and Brian have spoken to, a lot of implications for the financial space when we're thinking about climate risk. So they've been a part of those working groups and continue to inform implementation. And then myself and our resilience team works closely with the Department of Finance to integrate what we have as those identified risks into some of our financial documents. So our bond offerings, our official statements. It's, the city is doing this work. We're aware of the risks. We have strategies in place to address those risks and mitigate future impacts. And so we want to make sure that is included, that we're, not only showing what are those identified risks, but also what are we doing across our adaptation and our mitigation work to both address the core of the problem through mitigation, but also to, we know that we're going to continue to see impacts from these climate hazards. So what are we doing to minimize those impacts and include that as a best practice? We also do the voluntary reporting through CDP. We are really excited to be on the A list for the 3rd year in a row. And that's been a really wonderful exercise, both I think to share and about all of the good work that the city is doing and have it in something that is really comparable across cities for best practices. But through going through the reporting process for CDP, it's also helped us to think about how are we tracking this and identify areas maybe that we could continue to expand our work program in.
Great, thank you so much. Speaking of CDP, I'm going to have Katie come on in just a second. I just want to remind everybody that we welcome your questions. There are already some in the Q&A, so please put them in. And after Katie, we're going to get to questions both that I have and that the audience has raised. So Katie, CDP has been mentioned a few times. Can you describe what CDP is? Tell us what the tool is that helps cities and investors. We've just talked about, obviously, San Diego's work. Want to learn about the additional benefits of voluntary disclosure, as was just talked about, and do you see your tools to replace or in addition to sustainability reports? So a number of things there, but Katie, we'll turn this over to you with deep thanks for all the great work you and CDP does.
Oh, thank you. And I'm very appreciative to ICLEI and Ceres for organizing this. And Julia, great to follow you. And congratulations on your A that you earned. So I'm Katie Walsh. I'm the head of climate finance for cities, states, and regions, and our North America lead. So I have been in the organization for many years, working directly with a lot of the local governments who might be on with us, and increasingly working with the financial institutions and investors who are leveraging the data that is being disclosed by these local governments. So I'm happy to talk across both of these areas in my remarks. CDP, we are a global nonprofit, and we pioneered climate disclosure 25 years ago. So our goal ultimately is shifting capital towards this sustainable action, and as CDP calls Earth positive action, which is really about restoring the environment, reducing negative impacts, and then making sure that we have the health and equity of the places that people call home. And so the model that started CDP was really convincing 35 forward-looking investors to make a request to companies at the time to disclose emissions data and climate risks so that it can inform better investment decisions. So you can see these are some of the numbers just in terms of the scale and the impact in terms of the growth of the disclosure of companies. About 25,000 companies globally around the world are disclosing. We have close to 1,000 city governments, state governments, public authorities like transit agencies, airports that are participating, and really seeing this become more and more standardized across the board in terms of it being introduced either into regional or state or national policy making to enhance and provide disclosure of climate related data. We have also been in partnership with organizations like ICLEI to deliver the reporting for cities. We work also with the Global Covenant of Mayors, C40. We work with the Climate Group and Regions 4 for state and regional partnerships. So the request for data is really enhanced by the organizations that are also asking their members or asking those organizations that have made commitments on climate to use CDP as a tracking reporting mechanism for their membership base as well. So the areas that CDP covers is also enhanced over time. So we're looking at not just climate, but including water, including stopping deforestation, protecting nature, and then developing a circular economy. You can go through to the next slide. So, when we are working with local governments or companies across the board, suppliers, disclosing is surfacing three opportunities. So this first part is it can communicate out what Julia said, what progress looks like, but then really be a tool internally to identify, things that you necessarily haven't thought about yet, or risks in different areas of the local government. So really, again, it's a tool to drive internal change to increase disengagement. That second is the motivating factor that we heard Rob talk about with users of the data, users of the disclosure. So that's with investors. I can talk a little bit more about it later in terms of how we have learned from them, how they're using the data. And then this wider ecosystem. So, you know, the net positive of participation and the net positive of your local government is that it can really shape and influence a conversation on the needs of public finance and the needs of local governments, really providing a map across a place in terms of investments needed. So you can go actually to the map. I wanted to show the third slide, which is looking at who discloses. So this is last year. Today is our opening day for disclosure for 2025. So you can now, you might be getting emails from us, and if not, it's voluntary disclosure. Anyone can participate if you are a local government that's on the call. And there's you know, no fee as a city, county for you to and state for you to disclose through the CDP process. But we had 169 cities and counties that disclosed last year. And I'll just mention that this is, you know, globally all over the world, but, you know, whether it's, well, I'm in Salt Lake City today for the Urban Sustainability Directors Network meeting, but normally I'm in New York. And so whether it's Salt Lake City or New York City or, you know, Hastings on Hudson, it's just north of us in New York, population 8,000, all types of localities disclosed through CDP and can benefit from going through the process, whether it's a large or small place. So the next slide is just showing the area of the questionnaire. And I think what I would focus on, we're hearing a lot about hazards and risks, targets and priority areas. You can think of the CDP, ICLEI cities reporting as a readiness, a financial preparedness tool. And in fact, the questionnaire itself has these sections on climate risks and climate actions, and our questions are informed by the standards and ways in which the financial community is also assessing climate risks and climate opportunities. So we take these global international frameworks and then have them reflected into the questions that are asked in the questionnaire. So one framework I'll reference is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the TCFD. We heard a little bit about this earlier from Brian. Now, the TCFD, again, is a way in which the financial community has thought about climate risk, and the CDP ICLEI track questionnaire is aligned with the TCFD. So you go through that process and you have an outcome and output that is aligned. You can go to the next slide. You'll get comprehensive support if you're a member of ICLEI. You heard at the top, you know, they're actually working with you on your direct, you know, climate action planning. We're on the side of you are reporting out on those climate action plans and those hazards, and we will provide support. There's team members at CDP willing, ready to help and work with you. And we, again, can compare and contrast a lot of the data that we're seeing from other organizations as well, and have that be as a resource and a tool too as well. Next slide just gives you a snapshot of these frameworks, initiatives, and membership organizations. So we have taken it very seriously at CDP to ensure that, to our best ability, we're working with organizations so we can have sort of a single source of truth, a single source of entry for a local government. So if they have made a commitment to any of these global initiatives or local, regional initiatives, that they can use the reporting platform that is provided by CDP. So these are a couple of the logos that may or may not look familiar to you that we've aligned with. So again, you can go through the process and know that you're following that alignment, as well as the TCFD, which I previously mentioned. Next slide. This is the place where I would want to just focus on how we've learned that financial institutions are using CDP data. And I think this is the opportunity that we can learn more from what Brian's research has shown, and Rob is an investor who works at CDP for many years. But the feedback that we're getting in terms of the data that's being provided, right? So public disclosure, publicly provided, but the benefit is that they're able to, benefit to anyone is being able to see it in a standardized way, right? So whether you're an academic research, a nonprofit partner organization, a city yourself, or you're an investor, you're able to use this to inform different types of decision making. So these are reflected from what Rob said earlier, but this portfolio allocation. So, the first thing that we most often hear is looking for disclosure is a first step to knowing that there's management at the local level of these different types of hazards and risks. And so coming and identifying that someone's working and reporting through CDP ICLEI track is a first starting point. So they might use that for portfolio allocation to enhance decisions that they're making about investments, risk management as well, right? Understanding that is this place managing risks overall, informing internal policy making, and that again can be if they're making their own targets and commitments around what they want their portfolio to look like, for the needs of their own company, that they can use this as a data source. Reporting. So I do want to not do too much more jargon, but I will say that there is increasingly interest in quantifying and understanding the emissions of cities and towns to be able to do that accounting, that public accounting for financial institutions. And so there's standards now that are coming out. I can provide a link through PCAF of actually like looking at the data that's being reported so that it can be included in those scope 3 emissions for financial institutions. And we should be having standards, that come out in the near future that will really then, rely on data sources like CDP, ICLEI track data, to provide that to inform these PCAF allocations. And then finally, sustainable investing research. I think the last thing I'll say is that in any conversation that I have had in the last, 4, 5, 6 months has been sustainable investing is alive and well in the context of everything that is going on in the world around us, that is still the demand continues to increase, and that there still is a need for the local governments and for cities and counties to continue to press on and be able to use their own budget planning for these purposes, and then also to be able to demonstrate that they're taking action. Thank you.
Great. I think that's the last slide. So if you could to take down the slides, please. And we have lots of questions. Yeah. Take down the slides, that'd be great. And bring all the speakers back. That would be great, Onyx. Thanks so much. So there are lots of questions. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but let me start with one. And this first one, I'll leave to anyone who wants to answer, and then I'm going to jump in myself and give our perspective. But how can these disclosures, a provision of more information, drive investments in climate-prone cities? How would they ultimately affect cities' cost of capital? So, Julia, Rob, do you want to kick that off first? If either of you do, if not, I can. Julia?
Yeah, I can start with I think, how we look at it and approach it in terms of our infrastructure investments and our capital investments. Really, it's understanding what areas are at risk and what assets are at risk, and what that means for the city, so that when we do have future investments, that we're taking into account those risks, and that we are prioritizing investments where there might be the greatest future impact to the city, and ensuring that any of those investments are considering future conditions, so that when we're investing in infrastructure, that infrastructure is built in a way that it is going to be resilient, and that investment is protected, because our assets are intended to be there for 20 plus years, and so we want to make sure that they're really built for the future that we're going to see.
That's great. That's great. Rob, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can add, Stephen. Yeah, I guess in terms of the cost of capital piece, based on what we're seeing right now, and I alluded to earlier, there's really no meaningful climate pricing differential in the marketplace that, if a city were to do additional adaptation planning or and adaptation efforts, there may not, and maybe additional disclosure, there may not be any meaningful cost to capital benefit, at least right now. But based on what you said earlier, Stephen, and what everyone has been saying, it seems like it it is coming. So by doing good disclosure and good planning, we believe that issuers over time, cities over time, would be able to come to market and receive a lower cost of capital because of effective management of this issue over time.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we completely agree that, I mean, ultimately, as you said, it went from 5 to 30% that have some kind of information. If it gets deeper and it's more consistent, and there's both, as Julie talks about, both what the problem is and what the city's doing to address it. And if that's consistent, then we hope the rating agent, that investors like Rob's firm and many others, but then also the rating agency builds it in so that it is a lower cost of capital. Brian, did you want to add anything before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, just quickly. So I think the good thing about disclosure is it's sort of a two-sided benefit. One has just been discussed. It's going to be required to get access to low cost of capital in the future as climate risks rise. But the other, which is what Julia highlighted, it's a great way to coordinate internally, her 18 departments in her case, to make sure the city itself is getting prepared for climate, forget access to capital. So having the sustainability officer organize and push for good disclosure has both this external benefit, access to capital, and internal benefit of helping the entity get its act together.
Great, great. I would just encourage people again to use your Q&A. If your hand raised, we're not going to call on hands. We're going to use the Q&A kind of chat. Also, if you want to put your email in, because I don't think we're going to get to all of the questions, that we'll follow up with you. I also will, in the follow-up, you'll get my email. So if you have additional questions, I'm happy to follow up whether I'm the right person or not. Another question is there engagement with insurance companies in terms of what they're doing on climate risk? And again, let me turn this over generally, see if anybody wants to. I can tell you what Ceres is doing, but I don't know if this is something Julia, Rob, Brian, Katie, you want to add anything about insurance companies? Julia?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. Certainly in California, and the impacts to the insurance market are something that we're very aware of. There's been a lot of work both at the state level to think about how do we make sure that we have insurance options, but also, how does the industry need to change it, and what is the role of municipalities in that? There have been a lot of regional workshops bringing together both industry and government to have those conversations around what are the solutions for this? How do we make sure that insurance is affordable and that it continues to be available to our community members? We actually have a workshop this upcoming Monday, so it's certainly something that's top of mind. I'm not sure that we've solved the issue yet by any means, but I think we're definitely working with the insurance industry to start to have these conversations around how do we address this and how do we make sure that it's still a viable marketplace for these insurance companies and that it's affordable for the people that live in California.
Yeah, complete agreement. In the follow-up note, you'll get a link to Ceres' work on insurance, and it's both, as Julie said, for individuals living in cities, but also for cities themselves. There are many cities that are self-insured, but there are also new products not necessarily new, but different products like parametric insurance and other things that can be helpful for cities. So to look at that. Katie, you talked about, I think, 169, if I remember correctly, municipalities and states that have filled out. If we looked at this 5 years ago, what did we see on the municipal state side, and what do you think we'll see in 3 to 5 years from now?
Right. Well, I can talk about 10 years ago when I started CDP. And we had 12 US cities that were participating back then. And that was really the change in time, I think, that I can just see. So I'll say first on the disclosure and what we're seeing in terms of reporting. But when I made those early phone calls to local governments to ask them to disclose to CDP on climate data, on risks, on hazards, for a couple years there, I heard, oh, it's not affecting us. We're not feeling climate change. That disappeared 5 years ago, right? So I think and the double impact, obviously, of the pandemic, I think hitting local governments in particular. And I do want to say, in terms of disclosure and climate action, I think this might resonate with a lot of local governments on the call, but the impact of the pandemic, we're still feeling, because I think it really pulled local governments and their resources to the extreme in terms of how they had to respond, what they needed to do. And that, I think, is the challenge that we have, is that in light of more extreme weather events and in light of more of these sort of like episodic shocks, the ability to needing obviously to react in real time and do the right thing when you're responding to that, pulls you in a lot of different places. So I think what I mean by this is that use disclosure, use your activities as a way to use your process of disclosure, use your process of reporting as a way to start to engage and start the process, if you have the ability to do that now, so that you're set up, right? So that as the market shifts, and it shifts, when it shifts, it will happen. You want to be set up for success for that, right? And so I think now is best time as ever
Exactly.
to do that.
That is great. That's fantastic. Here's another question, again, open to anyone. Understanding that bond issuers and municipalities often need to prioritize access to financing and capital and finding the lowest fee underwriters. But could any of the speakers address the possible viability of municipalities evolving beyond measuring and disclosing climate risks in bond issuance towards applying stronger climate criteria to the pool of underwriters and issuers eligible to use? Specifically, so many underwriters lack 1.5 degree aligned or even net zero targets, which is at odds with the city's own climate action plans. Could setting stronger climate criteria for underwriters be a pathway to incentivize faster decarbonization? I'll turn that, anyone, Rob, Julia, Katie, anyone?
Yeah, so
Brian.
having issued bonds for some large progressive issuers where we did impose guidelines for underwriters or banks that did business with the city or the transit agency, the university in my case, I find that they're very responsive to that. And obviously a one-off isn't going to motivate a Wells Fargo, a one issuer putting requirements in isn't going to motivate a Wells Fargo. But if it's done across numbers of issuers, in my experience, underwriters are very sensitive. It's a tough business. They're looking for every margin. They don't want to be excluded. So in my experience, they are responsive to requirements by issuers related to sustainability measures. Obviously, that comes and goes a little bit in today's climate, but I would encourage folks to engage their bond counsels or financial advisors, city council, to sort of determine what's the right stance, how aggressive do you want to be in sort of making those requirements. But I think they can be effective myself.
And maybe I'll add, good to see Allison's question in there, is really the standards and frameworks that are being developed by PCAF. So I mentioned the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials has just put out a, I think public comment might have been closed, but this is around being able to give financial institutions the certainty and framework of how to do the accounting for their Scope 3 emissions, which includes these public sector actors like cities and towns. And so they will be very much looking for these goals and targets that have been set by local governments to address climate as part of their own Scope 3 emissions. So I'll provide that in our follow-up documents that go out, and would really invite you to engage on that, because I think that will, once that's like more finalized, that will also drive change.
Great.
Maybe I'll
Great.
just
I'm going to
add.
let, Rob, go ahead. Sorry.
Super quick. I think Katie and Brian made great points. I would just add that, although you're seeing a lot of US banks, or maybe all big US banks, leave big climate alliances like the Net Zero Banking Alliance, there's still real thoughtful, kind of dedicated teams within these banks that are paying a lot of attention to clients and their transition adaptation needs. So although at the high level they left for due in part to the political environment, I think you could find banks that are in teams that are really concerned about this.
Yeah. So we could obviously talk a lot more. There was another question just briefly about what role the fact that the federal government's going to be tracking less climate data. It's profound. I was at a meeting just recently where there was a list of literally 3 or 4 dozen data sets that are being stocked between NOAA and NASA and Department of Agriculture and Weather Bureau and FEMA and others. So obviously, I encourage everyone in this call to reach out to your congressperson or senator to tell them how important the data is. It's not politics, it's data. We could spend a lot more time. We will follow up with you individually. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out. Again, you'll get material from the partnership from ICLEI in the next week or so. And thank you all. Thanks to the speakers. I encourage all of you to take a look at the Ceres report and thank ICLEI and thank you all for your time. And we look forward to collaborating in the future. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you so much.